The point of a dominant ideology is to make it seem like the present order of things is a universal order, that the status quo is the natural expression of things, unchangeable. How convenient, then, for our bourgeois theorists, that our natural universal man, Eugene, happens to contain the seed of modern capitalist society in all of his preferencing and acting. It's as if every choice made by every human since the dawn of time was just an expression of some innate capitalist instinct waiting to come into being in our modern society. But it's not enough just to point out the obvious ideological basis of subjectivist theory. We must also prove that this ideological abstraction is an illegitimate one. Let's do that. It should only take a few minutes. The parable of Subjectivist Island leads one to think that human desires are formed privately, independent of society. But this has never been the case. Desires are taught, socially constructed, and can't be understood independent of society. How do subjectivists respond to this? They say, yes, desires may be constructed, but this is out of the scope of economics, so we don't have to consider it. In fact, this is how modern economics deals with all criticism. It ignores it and says it's the topic of another discipline. How convenient. It's like saying we don't have to consider the fact that the earth is round because that's out of the scope of flat earth theory. We can't understand desire without also understanding the ways in which we go about attaining our desires. Here's where the abstraction of Subjectivist Island breaks down. On the island, Eugene attains his desires by directly acting to get the things he wants. But these are not the sort of choices we make in a capitalist society. In capitalism, we have to sell our labor to someone else so that we can make a wage that we can then spend on the things we want, but only after we've given most of our wage to the landlord, the mortgage company, and the state. Subjective value theory has to prove that it can move this abstract model of choice from Subjectivist Island to a full-scale capitalist economy. It does this through the fantasy of barter. Let's say Eugene, while backstroking one day, discovers another island called Barter Island. Here lives Ludwig, who cracks coconuts all day. They decide to trade fish and coconuts, each one carefully measuring their utilities for fish and coconuts on their preference scales, calculating the precise exchange ratios to maximize their utilities, resulting in an exchange ratio between coconuts and fish. Now, says the subjectivist, we have shown that our abstraction was legitimate and that we can explain exchange ratios purely through the science of preference scales. If only it were that simple. The first thing we might notice is that the exchanges on Barter Island can only take place because Eugene and Ludwig have different resource endowments. If they both had access to coconut and fish, then there would be no reason to trade. In order for trade to continue in a sustained way, trade must reproduce these differences. This means that in order for a capitalist market to work, there must be the constant reproduction of a certain type of property relation in which people have to enter the market in order to get what they need to live. Specifically, people must be deprived of their own means of production, forced to enter the market to sell their labor in order to buy the things they need. This property relation must be continually reproduced through exchange so that there is always scarcity and people are always dependent on the market. Thus, we can see that something very sneaky has been done. What is it? We were trying to form a theory of barter based solely on subjective preferences, when all of a sudden, we realized we needed to assume a certain type of property relation in order to make any sense of it. Thus, abstracting away property relations and forming a theory of exchange without them is impossible and illegitimate. Even more damning is the fact that capitalist societies don't have anything to do with barter. People don't produce to directly exchange products for other products. We produce in order to exchange things for money. Money is an intermediary in all economic activity. So it makes no sense to say we measure our subjective utility for coconuts against fish when exchanging. We measure everything against money. When you are in the supermarket calculating your preference scales with the Preference app on your iPhone, you aren't just considering your preference for fish and coconuts in the abstract, as if on a desert island. you are also considering the market prices of these commodities. This market price already exists before you make your subjective value judgments. But this is problematic. Subjective valuations were supposed to explain price, but now we have to assume the prior existence of prices in order to explain subjective value judgments. It seems we are stuck in a big, messy circle. And if we are exchanging everything for money, then we must have a utility for money, right? But money has no direct utility. It's not even good for blowing your nose on. The value of money is what it will buy. And this is not set by our preferences, but instead reflects the relation of money to all other commodities, reflecting the vast interpenetration of millions of markets all over the world. There is no such thing as a personal utility for money, because money's value is already established by forces beyond our control. And there are more difficulties presented to subjective value theory by the presence of money. On Barter Island, Eugene and Ludwig had direct knowledge of what they were getting from each exchange. But in our world, we don't know exactly how much everything is going to exchange for ahead of time. When we sell a product in the market, we don't know exactly what products we will be able to buy with that income. There's a high degree of uncertainty. But with so much uncertainty, how are we ever to form those nice rational preference scales where we've perfectly calculated the exact utility relations of all commodities to each other? We can't. It seems that every time we try to abstract away property relations and production relations, they end up sneaking back into the picture. This is because it is absolutely illegitimate to try to explain capitalism without a theory of social relations between people as they actively produce the world they live in. Luckily, we have a better theory, and that's the theory of Karl Marx. In the real world, outside of the fantasies of bourgeois economics, subjects and objects have no meaning apart from their relations to each other. There is no such thing as a subjective individual floating in a vacuum. We develop our subjectivity through our relation to the objective world we inhabit. And the objective world can't be understood apart from the actions of societies of individuals who transform this world, bending it to their will, giving it meaning. Subjects and objects always exist in a relation, deriving their meaning from this relation. On Subjectivist Island, it seems like subjects form their value judgments through passive contemplation before they act on them. Judging happens first and then action. In the real world, we can only understand our subjective preferences once we understand the active process by which people relate to and transform the world. People work on nature. We chop trees and make houses. We build cars and dig up oil to power them. In transforming the objective world, we also transform ourselves. The modes by which we work upon the world determine our views of the world, the sort of values, needs, and desires we have in this world, and the manner in which we pursue these desires. These different modes of producing have changed throughout history, each mode producing very different sorts of societies with very different value systems. These different modes of relating to and transforming the world Marx calls modes of production. Capitalism is certainly not the first mode of production characterized by extreme inequality, war, exploitation, and instability. These qualities are part of all class societies. What is unique about capitalism is the way this domination of one class over another takes the form of relations between commodities. This is due to a particularly unique subject-object relation in capitalism, something Marx calls subject-object inversion. We will return to this in a moment.